Now, I know everybody's heard the saying, actions speak louder than words. And they always do, don't they? Chuck Swindoll tells about a 3-year-old boy who had been learning the game of golf by watching his grandfather play. The boy was so enthused, said his grandpa, I brought him his own set of clubs. Following week, the entire family had a cookout, and the little boy who had learned to golf by watching Grandpa announced, "Watch me play golf!" And then he said an unrepeatable swear word and threw his golf clubs into the tree. The little guy learned more than golf, didn't he? And he did it simply by observing his grandfather. We all imitate others from our earliest years, beginning with our families of origin. And then as our world expands, so do our opportunities to observe those outside our families. Imitation is a powerful form of learning, changing lives in the process. Our role models are important. What we do and how we live often speaks volumes, volumes more than anything we say, right? And so Paul praises the Thessalonians for becoming imitators of the missionaries and of he who we should all be imitating, Jesus the Christ. I knew I was going to have a problem with this word. Thessalonica, the community to which Paul writes this letter, was a major city in northern Greece. It was situated on the main east-west highway, which is called the Via Egnatia of the Roman Empire. It was the capital of the Roman province of Macedonia and very loyal to Rome. It actually survives to this day and is now known as Salonika. It's about 105 miles north of Athens. Chronologically, if the New Testament were arranged by dates of origin, 1 Thessalonians very likely would have been the very first book in the New Testament, not the Gospel of Matthew. 1 Thessalonians is the earliest of Paul's surviving letters. It was written about 50 CE. This would place it about roughly 20 years after Jesus' death and his resurrection, and about 20 years before the Gospel of Mark, which chronologically was the first gospel written. When Paul wrote this letter, it was at a time that the Christians had not started sharing or writing down their recollections of the life of Jesus and the meaning of his death and resurrection. Most of it was just an oral tradition at the time. But Paul was a Hellenistic Jew who, being part of that culture, used letters as a way of being present with someone when he couldn't be physically present. So these letters kind of have even a personal feel to them, like one written by a friend to another friend. And Paul instructs the Thessalonians to read the letter to all his brothers and sisters there every time they got together. Now, you may not have heard of the Thessalonians, but in the first century, their name was a household word, especially among the Christians in the Roman Empire. In the passage we just read, Paul tells them that all over the provinces of both Macedonia and Achaia, believers look up to you. The word has gotten around. Your lives are echoing the Master's word, not only in the provinces, but all over the place. The news of your faith has gotten around. It's not just you. It says the news of your faith in God is out. We don't even have to say anything more because you have become the message. You have become the message. Nowadays, companies, institutions, even countries are more concerned with their image than ever before. Unprecedented care is taken to ensure that the original, or what needs to be regarded as such, is depicted as closely as possible. be it on the internet and billboards and ads, whatever. We know very well that a single misrepresentation in the form of whether it's a poor product image, a badly constructed advertisement, or the wrong words coming out of the mouth of a public speaker can have catastrophic consequences. Take cars, for example. You happen to own a car from a certain brand and that car keeps breaking down all the time, you'll probably look at another car maker when it's time to buy a new car. On the other hand, if you ended up with a car which never gave you a problem, you might look no further when the time comes to buy a new car, and you just get either another one of that make and model or something else from that car maker. Now, this is the interesting part. Recent models of cars are produced in the hundreds of thousands, right? So a single sample out of that whole production shouldn't have such power to change your mind. I mean, one could argue that statistically it's insignificant. But it does change your mind, doesn't it? And the quality of that one car is significant to you. At the end, it still represents what the company building it stands for. Now here's a question. Why is it that this is also clear and natural to us when it comes to the perishable things of this life and this world, but we fail to see it in relationship to God? The Thessalonians, as I said before, became imitators of Paul and Silas, and most importantly, God. And they themselves became the models of believers in Macedonia and Achaia, the two Roman provinces of Greece at that time. But it didn't stop there. It didn't take much for this to happen because they represented God so clearly in a city filled with travelers and business people passing through daily. The world needs role models. I don't know if there's ever been a generation more in need of people who will set an example. Now here's a thought. What if indeed we turned out to be somebody else's role model? What if someone else is looking up to us, imitating us, doing the things we do and the way we do them? What if somebody else is basing their attitudes, their values, their actions on ours? Scary thought, isn't it? And it's scary because if it's true, we may have to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. We may have to even think about how we're living. I remember several years ago when NBA basketball star Charles Barkley made a public statement. He said that he didn't want to be a role model, to be anybody else's role model. He didn't want the pressure. Well, guess what? Too bad. There were probably thousands of kids that wanted to be just like Charles Barkley. Now that's a really scary thought. Truth is, if there's a chance that somebody is looking to you for clues about how to live your life, their life, we need to sit up and take notice. Consider that for a moment and ask yourself this question. If there is somebody looking up to you, you may not even know who they are. Would you live differently if you really believed they were following your example? Well, consider this. Someone is looking at you and imitating you. Maybe not your facial tics if you have one or any of your other mannerisms, but they are adopting your values. They're embracing your pattern of living. It may be your children or grandchildren. It may be the neighbor across the street. It may even be someone that you meet just casually in your everyday life. When they're trying to figure out what life might be saying to them about what's important in life, you've become the message. There was an article in the newspaper some times back, I can't remember when, about a New York assemblywoman who pleaded guilty to driving while intoxicated. Unfortunately, there's nothing unusual about that. What was sad was that she was the chair of the Assembly's Alcohol and Drug Abuse Committee. Then there was another woman by the name of Dranophis, also known as Rose, who was a poor woman who lived many years ago in Albania. Rose and her husband opened up their homes to the poor and hungry in their town. Whenever one of Rose's daughters would ask, "Who's this new visitor at our table?" Rose would answer that it was a relative. And I guess in a sort of universal way, it probably was. Rose's daughters grew up believing they came from an enormous extended family. And even when Rose's husband died and the family was plunged into poverty, Rose found a way to give food to the hungry and help the destitute. One of Rose's daughters was greatly influenced by her mother's example of sacrificial love. And now, as Paul Harvey would say, here is the rest of the story. This daughter, whose name was Agnes, grew up and became an advocate for the poor. She devoted her life to caring for those in need. For young Agnes grew up to become Mother Teresa, the 20th century's living example of Christ in the world. Mother Teresa became who she was because of the example of her mother. You see, the best hope that the world has is that God will raise up people who understand that our lives are intertwined, that who I am and what I do affects who you are and what you do. I can look at my life and see I am who I am because of the example of significant people in my life. And I know the same is true for each of us. This is how most people come to become followers of Christ. It's not because somebody argued them into faith, but it's because someone loved them into the kingdom, set an example of Christ-like living. There's a story in one of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books told by a mother in Costa Mesa. She says it was a hectic day in their home, but with 10 children and one on the way, every day, she said, was a bit hectic. On this particular day, however, this mother was having trouble doing even routine chores because one of her little boys, Len, who was 3 at the time, was on her heels no matter where she went. Whenever she stopped to do something, she turned around and there he was. Several times she patiently suggested that he go out and play, do something. But he would always turn and be next to her. Wouldn't you like to go out and play on the swing set? Wouldn't you like to go spend time with the other kids? But he simply smiled an innocent smile and said, "Oh no, Mommy, I'd rather be with you." And he would continually bounce around happily behind her. Well, after stepping on his toes for maybe the 5th time, Len's mom began to lose her patience and insisted that he go outside and play with the other kids. When she asked him, just before he went out, "You know, Len, why are you really acting this way?" He looked up with his sweet green eyes and said, "Well, Mommy, in Sunday school, my teacher told me to walk in Jesus' footsteps. But I can't see Jesus, so I'm walking in yours." Isn't that great? That's what it's all about, isn't it? Role models still count. Worthy examples still make a difference in our lives. There's so many people who wonder why their lives are empty and hollow and frantic. They never consider that it might have something to do with the people that they choose to imitate and the kind of goals that they have set for themselves. I don't know if you heard about the story of a man who was fired from the highway department. I didn't know that anybody was ever fired from the highway department, but apparently this guy was. He was hired to paint lines down the middle of the highway. First day, he painted 8 miles. Supervisor was ecstatic. Next day, he only did 4 miles. And the following day, only 1 mile. And on the 4th day, he only did a 1/4 mile. And so the supervisor felt he had to fire him. But before he did, he asked him this question: how come you only painted a quarter mile on this last day? Man replied, well, to tell you the truth, I just kept getting farther and farther away from the paint can. See, if we're not making a difference to others, if our reputation's nothing special, if our lives are empty and hollow, maybe it's because we're getting too far away from the paint can, God. Too far away from those important examples of faith and love and hope that are around us. Too far away from the source and inspiration of our faith. Jesus, you see, came to give us life and to give it abundantly. He came to seek the lost and bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release of the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, and to let the oppressed go free. And He's shown. People wanted to be near Him, to be like Him. Today we too can be near Him, and we need to be like Him. Let me close with this. One of my favorite musicals is Man of La Mancha. It's about a slightly demented knight, Don Quixote, who wanders in an imaginary world fighting for right and bringing hope to those in despair. In one of the songs that he sings, and I think it sums up pretty well what I'm trying to say, he sings this, and I'm just going to speak it for it's better that I do it this way. It's to dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love pure chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too weary, to try when your arms are too weary, to reach the unreachable star. This is my quest. To follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right, without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell with a heavenly cause. And I know if I'll only be true to this glorious quest, that my heart will lie peaceful and calm when I'm laid to my rest. And the world will be better for this, that one man, scorned and covered with scars, still strove with his last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable star. You see, it's possible. That's what God wants for us. We can, in turn, make that happen. We can be the kind of congregation and that kind of people. And you see, if we are that message, then that's the kind of message I want folks to hear in our lives, in our homes, and in our country and this world. Amen.